disputes over the whys, hows, and wherefores of religious life are constantly implicated. We're in a period in our shared life here in this country where everybody's very vehement about religion, but in a kind of content-free manner.
But the dilemma we face now, I think, is that there's so much media out there that is ideologically driven, and people have facts that aren't facts, but they absolutely fervently believe them to be facts. I mean, I was reading one of your sites last night and was surprised reading the comments that the president has admitted being a Muslim and doesn't believe in the Constitution. And this was said with, he has admitted this. Right. You know, they have citations, they have multiple websites and footnotes to support this. And I think that makes it that much harder because there are facts out there, there are things that smell and look and feel like facts to a huge percentage of the American people, and there's no talking them out of it. And that makes reporting, finding the truth, particularly difficult.
I think you know, an awful lot of coverage underlines basic values in the society. We point out hypocrisy, even though hypocrisy is not against the law. That's what is going on in Atlanta now. And it seems to me that, as you know, one of the consequences of having the free exercise and clause of the First Amendment is that we throw a lot of the pressure that in other places the state just brings. You can't burn a holy book of someone else. That counts as blasphemy. You can't do it. I mean, India bans, you know, Salman Rushdie. We throw that into a kind of into the public square, and in this case, you know, the general in Afghanistan, the Secretary of Defense, everybody gets into the act to kind of put the entire society through an exercise of reinforcing the basic values of the society, which are, one, you can burn it, and two, it's a really, really, really bad idea. And in the end, he didn't burn it.
So rarely, you know, a free press, which has this right under the First Amendment, so rarely takes the opportunity to look for a teachable moment about these things.
We have an erroneous public perception that we're not allowed to teach about the Bible or the world's religions in the public schools. Between 3/4 and 2/3 of Americans on those questions think that this is not a topic that can be broached in the public schools. We don't have that perception about geography, for example. You know, we know we're allowed to teach where Iraq is on a map. We think we're not allowed to teach what Christians believe. We think we're not allowed to teach what the 5 pillars are of Islam. So this is, to me, is the great catch-22 in this survey, is that we have this religious illiteracy in the public, but the illiteracy is so huge that we think we're not allowed to remedy it in the public schools.
And one little thing to add here that maybe is common knowledge, but you can teach about religion in a science classroom. There's no Supreme Court decision that says you can't teach about religion in any classroom. I do think it's settled that you can't teach a religious perspective as science. We know that. That's unconstitutional. But that doesn't end the debate, because now folks want to use the science standards to say, well, we'll teach scientific alternatives to the prevailing view in science. And that would be, they think, a doorway for their view, which they consider scientific, to finally get in there. So we're a long way from a civil conversation about exactly where do you teach students about this controversy and teach them the context for understanding why people believe such different things about creation, for example.
The survey also included 3 questions about restrictions on religion in the public schools. Of all the questions in our survey, the single question that the highest percentage of people got right was, according to Supreme Court rulings, not your own opinion, according to Supreme Court rulings, is a public school teacher allowed to lead a class in prayer? Now, nearly 9 out of 10 Americans correctly said no. At the same time, however, one of the questions most often answered incorrectly was whether it is permissible, according to Supreme Court rulings, for public school teachers to read from the Bible as an example of literature. Now, only 23% of those surveyed know that this is permitted. It's explicitly permitted by the Supreme Court.
What does it hurt
if we really all do share the same beliefs, if we do them in public contexts, if the state gets involved, what does it matter if that's what if we have the prayer at school, or what does it matter if the football game on Friday night, the coach says a prayer? Well, think about what children growing up in that context would then begin to think of as their religion. It is not something which is chosen for spiritual reasons or which they thought out entirely. It's not even a product of their particular church or religious authorities. It becomes all intermixed with the mayor and the school board and the football coach and everything else. And you start losing some very, very important spiritual concepts and notions that go to the very way in which we form our consciences. So I think under any circumstances, it's important that we maintain that separation for the benefit of the church as well as the state.
Antonin Scalia, in several of his opinions regarding the death penalty, has talked about the history of the death penalty and talked about the fact publicly that he's a Catholic and what that means and what it doesn't mean to him. Yet Catholic social teaching is now, and has been for quite some time, that the death penalty is no-go. It should not be allowed. And the Catholic Church has been outspoken in specific cases involving people waiting on death row in the United States for their execution. So when he is the justice of responsibility for a circuit and turns down a petition for a stay, is it in or is it out that he has had public things to say about Christian teaching, about capital punishment, and about the way he synthesizes those two for himself?
I mean, I think it's in, you know. I think that if he's made public pronouncements on it, then it's fair game, just like any other story. And even if he hadn't made public pronouncements, but there are, say a history of his Catholicism, influencing decisions, or if there is a correlation between the two, then that's a story worth investigating. So, I think it's fair game, and it would be irresponsible not to follow that.
Every time?
Yeah, that's it. I mean, I think.
Should we be reminded that the Catholic Church is against capital punishment?
Well, every time he makes a decision on a stay, I think it's relatively easy.
I think you raise a large issue in the society, not just about what the media should look at, but how we differentiate expressions of religious commitment and stance from action in the public square. I mean, one of the things that disturbs me is that there's been a lot of agitation and sort of criticism of the John F. Kennedy line from his speech to the Houston ministers, that there's a kind of absolute separation, and there is a kind of acceptance, and now even in the Democratic Party, that we should bring our religious values to the table. But when we go to court, we can't make those kinds of arguments. The Bible tells us so. And so what you get is increasing numbers of court cases in which you've got religious actors making essentially bad faith claims that, this is not really about the advancement of religion, this is about something else. I won't cite chapter and verse, but it happens. And so I think we are in need of, as a society, of some greater clarification about where these religious convictions stop in the public square and where they pick up. And that's a problem for the news media too.
If you think it's bad now that people have students are not getting much about religion, you should have seen it 20 years ago. And there's been a sea change, I would argue, between what we saw in the late 80s, early 90s, which was almost silence about religion in textbooks and frameworks and then later standards, to today, when, according to a study that we published a number of years ago, all state social studies, existing state social studies standards include generous treatment of religion. And textbooks that I reviewed back in the 1980s that barely mentioned religion, it was almost non-existent, now are in many cases fairly generous to religion. So generous that the fight now is over too generous, too much Islam, not enough Christianity, like in Texas today. So I just want to put it in context. It's different today than it was 20 years ago. We have a long way to go, but the how you do it is, I think, the core question still for many teachers who are still afraid or nervous about tackling religion.
I mean, there's the basic constitutional principle that we don't count heads before enforcing the Bill of Rights. That even if there is one person, that is enough. That is the whole point of protecting minority rights. We do it in many areas: equal protection, free speech, religion. And on the point that no one did speak up, when people do speak up, they face retribution, vilification, violence. Their house gets burned down. I mean, this happens all the time, which is why in many of our cases, including, and probably especially in many of our schools' cases, we bring the cases on behalf of someone locally who is complaining and wants to do it anonymously.
How do we, as the world's most religiously diverse nation on this planet, live together with this tremendous variety of faiths and denominations and faith traditions that we have, and people feeling very, very deeply about their faith? How do we live together? How do we wrestle with this ongoing and continuing question, which for me at least is the heart of the series, which is religious liberty? I mean, my own feeling is that liberty is a great and noble principle. Liberty is very messy in practice, and we're seeing now, I mean, in the headlines every day, how messy and how hard liberty can be. That said, I also think that this kind of almost generational struggle, each generation having to sort of confront the meaning of liberty, is what helps to keep liberty alive. So I think you're absolutely right. I think we're moving into a phase which draws very deeply and fully as it must upon the past. I feel there's something new in the air. I can't quite put my finger on it, but I do think that liberty and diversity will always be with us. And I think the challenge of both of them is going to be at the forefront in the coming years.